Hi, I'm Gil Fitzhugh, and I'm a member of the Horseless Carriage Club of America. We're a bunch of people who like to preserve history by restoring and driving some of the oldest cars you'll ever see. This is one of my cars. It's a 1906 Buick. Now, Buick started out in 1904, so the company was only 2 years old when it built this car. You may think this is an extremely ancient car, and you're right, it is. But when it was new, it was very up to date. It was so up to date that the very first car that ever crossed the United States with 4 people in it was one identical to this, a 1906 Buick Model F. It has a 2-cylinder engine, it has 24 horsepower, it has chain drive, you light the lamps with a match, and 105 years ago, this was as good as it gets. You may wonder just how old 105 years is. Most people don't have any perception of that. Let's look at it this way. I'm kind of an old guy. I'm 74 years old. If my father were alive, he'd be a really old guy. He'd be 102. When my father was born, this car was already 2.5 years old. Now, I'd like to show you a few of the things that people did with cars in those days. This is not an electric lamp. This is a gas lamp. If you looked in here, you don't see a bulb, you see a burner. And there's a brass box on the side of the car that generated acetylene gas, the same kinds of things that welders use. And when it got dark, you dripped some water onto calcium carbide crystals and you made acetylene gas. And you came out here and you opened this headlight and you opened the other one, you had a long match, and you lit your lamps. That was called light up time. Now this side lamp is not acetylene. This is like a hurricane lantern. It has a wick and you can burn lamp oil or kerosene. There are 2 interesting features about it, other than the fact that it's very shiny brass and rather pretty. One is that it has a handle on it. Now, why would you have a handle on the lamps to your car? Because when you got home from town on a dark night and you put your car in the barn, you could take a wrench and you can loosen this nut, you could lift the lamp off and light your way home from the barn to your back door, and you wouldn't step in anything that your animals might have left behind. The other interesting thing is that this car, and this is a very unusual feature, it has kind of a green glass hat here in the front. And on the other side, it has a red glass hat. Just like a boat in those days, it had a ruby light to port and a green light to starboard. You might be interested in how these cars were sprung. This is the spring in the front. It's several spring steel leads. This one is 3/4 elliptic. It's got a 1/2 ellipse on the bottom and a 1/4 ellipse on the front, on the top, and it has no shock absorbers. The ride is soft enough to take you through the ruts, but if you go fast down a rutty road, it can be really jouncy with no shock absorbers. Sometimes people ask me if this is a front-wheel drive car because they see this gear mounted on the right front wheel. No, that wouldn't be nearly strong enough to drive the car. What that does is spin a little cable that runs up through this brass housing and works the speedometer that tells me how fast I'm going. The speedometer on this car stops at 60 miles an hour, and believe me, it won't go that fast. The wheels are made of wood, except for the outer rim, which is a clincher steel rim like a bicycle wheel, but this part and these parts are all hickory. People sometimes ask me why it has 5 different valve stems to pump up the tire. It doesn't. This is the only one that lets in air. In the old days, the tires were so soft that they would sometimes peel right off the rim on a rough road. And on the back side of these things were wedges that forced the bead of the tire into the hollow metal piece and kept it on the rim. Our modern antique car tires are much better built, and we don't need those wedges. So those things are now just decoration, and they get people like you to ask me why the car has 5 valve stems. Modern traffic regulations say that every car should be equipped with a suitable audible warning device, what we call a horn. Now, the term blowing the horn comes from these days when, as you can see, the horn really was a horn. It looked like a musical instrument. In fact, it was a musical instrument. It has a musical reed right here, and in order to make a noise with it, you blow air through this bulb. You won't find any plastic in the body of this car because they mostly hadn't invented plastic 105 years ago. This is a coach-built body. It was individually made out of wood. These doors, which are made of wood, have a beautifully cast brass hinge. Look at how this comes in 2 pieces. And please ignore the junk I have in my back seat. The upholstery is made of leather, and it's tufted. Underneath is packed with horsehair. And these buttons sewn in give it its shape. I'll bet your modern car has a tilting steering wheel so you can be comfortable. And probably the car you bought 15 or 20 years ago didn't. But if you'd bought this car over 100 years ago, you're going to put the wheel up to help you get in. You're going to put it down to this position or this position, depending on how you want it to drive. Standard equipment didn't have what it has today. Today, if you buy a convertible, it has a top. It also has windows, and it has a windshield. This car has a top. It's folded. It takes 2 people a lot of work to put it up. You have to move this lever, this arm up to here and pull the whole thing up and hold it down here with straps. And then if you don't want the wind in your face, you can take the windshield and put it up like that. But it has no windows. It has no doors in the front. And the top and the windshield were not standard equipment. Those were add-ons. When you bought the car, if you didn't ask for a top, a windshield, and a speedometer, you didn't get them. I've shown you some modern features, like the tilt steering wheel. But here's something very old. You probably think this is the engine. That was the intention, that you would think, if you were a passerby, that this is a very modern, up-to-date car, like the very modern cars coming out of France in 1905 and 6. But in fact, the engine is where it was in the most primitive American cars, which is under the seat. This is just a gas tank under here, and here's how I fill it. The engine is down here under the passenger seat. It has 2 cylinders, and they're great big ones. You have one going forward and one going aft. The crankshaft goes left to right. The carburetor, which is a little newer than the original, and that carburetor is out of about 1920 because it runs better that way. The air and fuel mixture has to come from the carburetor and then change direction, so half of it goes to the back cylinder and half of it goes to the front cylinder. On the other side of this car is the transmission. Now the transmission on this car is a 2-speed planetary. It's actually quite similar to the first 2-speed automatic transmissions that came out in the 1950s, except that you have to do it yourself. It has nothing automatic. It works with 2 pedals and a lever. If the engine is running and I step on this middle pedal, I engage a clutch, and that's low speed, or first of the 2 forward speeds. The car is now going forward slowly. When I'm ready to go a little faster, I let this back up. Now I'm in neutral. I take this lever and I shove it forward. Now we're in high gear. And if I hung on tight and nothing fell off and I didn't scare myself to death, we could probably get 40 miles an hour out of it on a good road. It doesn't like to go that fast. I like to run it between 25 and 32. If I get it up to 34, it says, hey, come on, I'm getting old. And if I get it up to 36, it starts to backfire. And if I get it to 38, my passengers start to scream, and I haven't tried going faster than that. These 2 little levers on the steering wheel are the spark and the throttle. The throttle was essentially like the gas pedal, fast, idle. The spark sets the timing of when the explosion takes place. When I'm driving, I have it fully advanced, so the spark fires early and I get lots of power. When I'm starting the engine, I have it way down there so it doesn't kick back and break my arm. Now to start this car, we use this gadget. It's called a crank. I told you I had to keep the spark retarded so I didn't break my arm. I turn the ignition on. Now this engine is warm, so with a little luck, it'll start fairly easily. I'm going to start bringing it up on compression, and then we'll see how many times I'm going to have to do this. You see the chain shaking up and down with the vibration of the car? Now the way this power gets to the rear end is a great big chain, like a huge bicycle or a motorcycle. That was very common for the cars that had the engines under the seat. When they moved to front engines, they went to shaft drive. One of the things we really like is showing off our cars to people like you and teaching you what it was like 100 years ago. Thanks so much for joining me, and this is the equivalent of vroom.